Welcome back to Food Systems Podcast from the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. My name is Mark Titterington. I'll be your host for today's session, and delighted to have with us Steve Statler, Chief Marketing Officer at Wiliot, and also host of the Mr. Beacon podcast. Today we're going to be talking about food traceability, relevant in the context of the Food Safety Modernization Act, but also doubtless of interest to our listeners here in Europe, given the forthcoming European Union Sustainable Food Law. Steve, great to have you with us.
Mark, it's a privilege.
Just want to start, Steve, by, food traceability is very much one of the topics of the day in food system and food system transformations now. Why do you think it's got so much importance attached to it?
Well, I think it's always been important. There's been a convergence of regulatory compliance, which is kind of the stick, but the carrot has been a desire for this industry to build trust, we've been through waves of crises, as inevitably there are contamination issues, people get sick, and then that impacts demand. I think there's also been a sprinkling of thought leaders and idealists that have wanted to kind of raise the bar and gain some competitive advantage and add to their brand that kind of higher quality, proven, trusted brand. So I think it's really a combination of let's make sure the demand stays. Let's stay the right side of the legislative landscape, and then there's a competitive element in there as well.
Now, you talked a little bit in there about the stick, the regulatory stick, perhaps, and we, as you rightly say, we've got the Food Safety Modernization Act as the catalyst or the stimulant for our discussion today. For our European listeners, just say a little bit more about what you think that is and the role it'll play, and then let's get into the implications of that for the agri-food industry, including, from our perspective, the farmers and the ranchers.
Yeah, so I think the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, implemented and passed some years back the Food Safety Modernization Act. Section 204 specifically focuses on traceability, and at its heart, it's pretty simple. It's a move to give a unique identifier, a traceability lock code that starts off in the farm, actually maps to a field, and then flows through in a chain with a series of handoffs in the supply chain all the way to the retailer. So batches of product will be given a unique ID, a traceability lock code. There'll be a source ID that says where it comes from, and then as the produce flows up the supply chain, there'll be records kept, and there's an obligation to give the FDA, in the event of a food crisis or them asking, a spreadsheet that basically goes one up, one down. Where did you get it from? Where did you give it to? The quantity, the description, and the identity of a lot that applies not to every food, but there's a certain set of foods that are on the list. So the FDA is actually not covering meat and milk, but it does cover eggs and cucumbers and some sorts of cheeses. And that list has been put together based on a risk factor. So I think in this country, in the States, there's a creative tension between the people that want to legislate and the people that want to have kind of free market. The way they got the FSMA rule through was to say it's not going to be for everything. It's just going to be for the higher risk items where there's been a track record where the issues have existed. But there's a very specific deadline. So we're in a status where there's a final ruling. So this is not something that's changing. It's done, it's documented, it's written, and there's a deadline, which is Tuesday, January the 20th, 2026, when everybody, whether you're a farmer, a distributor, a packer, or a fast food restaurant or a grocer, everyone needs to be ready. And basically, we have 24 hours to give a spreadsheet that has the traceability information that I just described to the FDA if they should request it. So it's definitely very specific. It doesn't cover everything, but ironically, even though this may have been a give to get, but in the legislative negotiations, it's proving to be pretty complicated for especially people at the end of the supply chain, the grocers, to figure out what's covered, what's not covered. And you've got a bunch of minimum wage employees that are working in the middle of the night. They're not going to be saying, oh, that's a hard cheese, I don't need to worry about that, but soft cheese I do. So it's effectively driving us towards a future where our food supply chain is tracked and traced, and there's a digital identity, a digital passport, and a unique ID for everything that's flowing up and down that chain.
I do want to come back, Steve, to where this might go, both in not just in terms of food safety, but potentially sustainability attributes around crops. I plan that in your mind, maybe to come back to in a second.
Yes.
Before we go there, you've argued, not on your own, but there's maybe not everyone sees this as an opportunity. You have said you think this is an opportunity for the agri-food industry. Why do you believe that?
I think it is. Everyone wants to do the right thing. No one wants to make people sick. Everyone wants to manage risk, but it's really hard for the industry to act. Especially if you think, well, I'm going to invest this, there's an opportunity cost, there's a capital cost, and maybe my competitor won't. And so that's a real break on doing the right thing. Early in my career, before I joined Wiliot, which is an IoT company, I was consulting with companies that wanted to use Bluetooth identifiers. And one of the companies I was doing work for was in the spices, herbs and spices business. And there was a young heir apparent, the son of the founder, and he wanted to move the company forward and start tracking and tracing everything: people, tools, raw materials, finished goods. And even for the son of the founder, it was really hard because, there were the voices of reason within the company that said, look, we can't afford to do this. We don't have to do it. People don't really value it. So I think there's some, the legislation sets a level playing field and it raises the bar for everyone at the same time. And so it's not going to be a competitive disadvantage. But what it will do is drive new platforms where people can, relatively easily go beyond simply identity tracking to doing other things. We're focused on Wiliot, the company I work for. We have these tiny postage stamp size compute devices. They cost pennies and they can measure temperature. So one of the reasons we're excited about this is that we think that once people have the platform, they can use the platform for cold chain tracking, for looking at the temperature history, which can reduce waste, which is in everyone's interest, that can improve the product quality so it looks better in the store, and there's better conversion rates, and it increases shelf life, so everyone is happier. So our hope is that when this platform's in place, people can use it for cold chain, but also for carbon tracing. And, I think given the European backdrop to this as well, there's new rules around provenance tracking, showing that your food is not coming from an area which has been clear cut. So I think if we can get this platform in place, there's a lot of really cool things we can do that will benefit everyone, producers, consumers, everyone up and down the food chain.
Well, I'd love to get into that a little bit more with you. Just again from our European listeners, and thinking about how our traceability approach might evolve here. You touched on potentially one of the risks to the food companies is being able to differentiate between the hard and soft cheese at the end of the line. Are there other risks, and what are the penalties for non-compliance? Are there any?
Yeah, I mean, potentially the FDA has a very big stick that they can apply. They control the food licenses that are required to do business. They're I think being very they're not being threatening. But that's they certainly have the ability to impose fines, increase inspections. So there's also, reputational risk. As a vendor, one of the things that I look at is, will people just pay lip service to this and basically say, this is impossible, it's too difficult, we're not going to do it, and so everyone spins their wheels and puts a lot of effort into something that ultimately isn't adopted. But this, appears to be very serious. And as I talk to some of the largest companies in the world who are our customers, and I've asked them point blank, do you think you have to do this? Is this something where you can kind of wait and see? But really, there isn't the time to do this. We've got less than 3 years. Some of our customers have thousands of stores, well over 5,000 stores. And really, that means they have to start now. And they can't take the risk of wait and see, because if their competitor ends up complying and they've said, oh, it's not going to happen, then that does a number of things. It makes them look really bad in terms of the FDA. It makes them look really bad in terms of the consumer's view. And the thing that I hadn't really thought about is the industry gets wired by their competitors and around their processes and procedures, and there's still a lot of things that need to be sorted out in terms of how you implement the law. The law is actually very high level. It doesn't prescribe some of the nitty-gritty details, and so there's still some competitive advantage to trying to get everyone to comply with the approach you want to take versus that your competitor wants.
So let's talk a little bit then. You've touched on it already about the role that technology plays, the role of your company as well. But both now and how do you see the technology evolving that will not only enable adaptation, compliance with the Food Safety Modernization Act in this specific way, but other ways, as we talked about? You mentioned carbon, sustainability attributes, and so forth. I think our listeners would be interested in that.
Yeah. Well, the law, as it's defined here in the States, does not prescribe any particular technology. Even this ID that goes and follows a batch of spinach from the field into the store, you can identify it in any format that you wish, but there are specific standards. The GS1, which obviously is tremendously pervasive around the world, defines the UPCs that we use and the barcodes that we use to identify products. It seems like the global trade identification number, serial GTN, is kind of the winner in that war, although you can use other things, UUIDs and other things to identify. But that's just the data. What is the carrier is really the question. How do I use a printed barcode? That's obviously cheapest. Everyone's got a printer somewhere, or they can get them at a relatively low cost. Do you use RFID, the radio frequency identifier tags that have really caught on in this country in the apparel business, but less so in the food business? Or do you use this next wave of technology, which is the one that we're proponents of, which is ambient IoT? Ambient IoT is essentially the radio frequency identifier, the RFID tag, taken to the next level, where you have computing and sensing and security and encryption, and basically the infrastructure. Rather than having to have a $1,000, $2,000 handheld reader, you can use low-cost Bluetooth devices. So there's some technology decisions that need to be made. And I think all of those choices, completely manual barcodes, RFID, or ambient IoT, they all have their pros and cons. The thing that I think is going to be a big swinger, and I think the reason why ambient IoT will ultimately prevail, is not only the capital costs of the equipment being lower, but also an opportunity to automate. So with barcode scanners and QR code scanners, you need to track things at a case level. You can't just take a rolling cage with a tag and scan it. That's not granular enough, because that rolling cage could have different, it could have cucumbers, and it could have lettuce, and it could have spinach. So you really need to unpack things in the store in order to scan them. And that's not what most large supermarkets do at the moment. They kind of have a bill of lading. They have an advanced shipping notice. They basically get told what they're being given, and they kind of trust you. Not to say they don't occasionally check, but the stores simply don't have two people on call 24 hours a day to scan in everything with handheld scanners. And so we think that having these Bluetooth readers that cost a few tens of dollars sprinkled around the store is the way to go, because you can automate and scan in things without having to hire a bunch of extra people. And once you've got that infrastructure in place, then your inventory tracking improves. So that's a lot better if you're fighting the omni-channel wars, and you need to have better inventory accuracy, so that when people buy online, pick up in store, buy online, and have deliveries, you've actually got real data that's actually been scanned, rather than kind of the assumed data which the industry has been working on before. So I really think that FSMA, food safety generally, will be a driver to a level of visibility. The consumers of our customers call this a visibility platform. Real-time visibility is will be the table stakes, and people will have the infrastructure, and it'll be very helpful in many other things. So I think that all three approaches will be taken. Obviously, we're a proponent of the next generation, and one of the things that's interesting about ambient IoT at the moment, it's all about Bluetooth, but there are a bunch of standards coming out from the industry bodies. 3GPP is one, and the IEEE is another. So those are the industry bodies that set the standards for 5G and 6G, the cellular standards, and also Wi-Fi. And they're all bringing out their own ambient IoT standards. And so we are seeing this kind of wave of technology that is coinciding with some regulatory demand, and also some business needs around omnichannel and giving consumers better visibility of where their food came from.
I just wonder as well, and I mean, that's the food safety traceability piece, Steve. But could you then? We touched on it a little bit earlier. Could you transfer that over into the carbon footprint of a batch of cucumbers or lettuce? Could it extend to other sustainability attributes as well?
Yes, there's there's a general desire, I think, by many people to reduce the carbon footprint, but our current cadence of measurement is an annual one. If you or I had some horrible cancer diagnosis and we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, this is really bad, I'll see you in a year, we'd be like, what? I'd like regular checkups. Let's get on top of this thing. Yet, I live in Southern California. When I moved in, there was a wildfire that burnt our neighbors' houses down. So, to say, oh, we're going to do a check on, let's make a commitment on carbon reduction for 20 years' time, and we'll check in once a year. This doesn't pass the sniff test in terms of having a level of urgency and measurement. So we really believe that real-time carbon footprint measurement is the way to go. The same traceability infrastructure for FSMA can give you that item level carbon footprint measurement. If you can measure that cucumber and say, oh, it's been sitting in the back of the supermarket in the car park in a refrigerated container with a diesel motor running, the carbon footprint of that cucumber is significantly higher than one that went straight into the coolers in the store. And the ability to start to give enterprises real-time visibility of that carbon, so that the store manager, the logistics manager, the product manager can see it and use it as an operating metric to, carbon is cost. So this is not philanthropy. If you can reduce your carbon footprint, hold accountable and empower everyone in the business to start reducing carbon, then I think we can really make a lot faster progress. And it's not going to be a tax. This is going to be a measure of efficiency and effectiveness and quality. So carbon is a cost, and I think it's going to be the next quality metric that we use. And having item level traceability is the way that you start to make the calculations that this cucumber has got a lower carbon footprint than that cucumber. And ultimately, this can be exposed to the consumer, especially with ambient IoT. You could have an app that the consumer can use to see not just, the theoretical carbon footprint, but they can put their buying power behind the purchase of products that are going to, steer us in the right course faster.
I want to talk a little bit next, or in a moment, Steve, about how that could lead to food companies, reimagining themselves. I mean, there's I think some of your words rather than mine. Just before we get there and move off of the topic that we're on, I mean, we've talked about cucumbers and cheese being part of the categories of products that will be touched by this. But could you see it? Is there a way to do that for the commodities? And I'm talking really grain here. That obviously are going into, finished goods that end up on the supermarket shelf.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these products that are shipped, even especially if they're shipped in reusable containers, you can apply these sensors to barrels, to totes. And so this visibility doesn't just have to be on cases and primary packaging. It can be on the kind of bulk shipping containers. So it can absolutely be for those raw materials. And I think what is going to happen is we'll just get much better visibility of the supply chains when we do this. At the moment, our supply chains, to use a metaphor, it's like we've been operating in the dark and we all have torches or flashlights, as we say over here in the States, and they've got limited batteries. So we turn them on and off and we get a little bit of visibility of where things are. What we're talking about with this new world of ambient Internet of Things technology is turning the lights on. So you see everything all of the time. And when you do that and you start to share information up and down the supply chain, and the producer of those raw materials, the grain and so forth, they can actually see where it is in the supply chain, then they can start to, regulate their own production and shipping and distribution, and basically optimize, their own business based on knowing what's happening up the supply chain, which is up until now been, opaque. It's not been visible. And when we turn the lights on and you can see the whole supply chain in real time and everyone's sharing the data, which you can do with this technology, then I think the improvements that we'll get in quality and safety and cost reduction will be really significant.
Thanks for taking that on. I mean, you can imagine, I think certainly from the European perspective, traceability, particularly in supply chains that go across oceans. I'm thinking particularly of, perhaps more controversial debates about, use of GM technology in production processes and so forth. You can see how the advent of this kind of technology, and as you said, turning the lights on the whole supply chain will be of particular interest. You've talked about how that can lead to a reimagination, if you like, of the food companies, the agri-food companies. If this really takes off, how do you think the industry will look in 10 years' time, or maybe longer?
Well, I think in 10 years' time, this will have turned the lights on in the production side. It will give visibility into what's happening in farms, products sitting in a packing shed for too long, that can be alerted immediately. The first in, first out is actually turned into a last in, first out. So I think there'll be optimization there. I think shopping will be different. The kind of theft and so forth, that loss prevention will be different, because with everything connected, if you have your payment credentials online and you take something from the store, Now that's really all that's required to buy it. So so theft becomes different. If you happen to have 12 cases of some valuable product in your home, then and you haven't paid for them, then that will be visible in real time. And I think the commerce model will change. Some of us have played with the Amazon Dash button. You ran out of coffee, you pressed a button, you got it delivered. I think the packaging of these products will become the Amazon Dash button. They'll the cornflakes, the flour container, the cinnamon and the pepper containers. They'll all be online. They'll be measuring freshness. They'll be showing where you've got product that's missing. They'll be showing product that's expired. And so you'll be able to subscribe to your pantry, the different categories. You can have them directly shipped to you. And, those demand signals, your consumption of the product, which is currently not visible, if you choose to share it, and it will be a choice, the privacy laws don't go away, they still apply. But if you choose to share that and you want the subscription service to a fully populated herbs and spices cabinet, and you never want to run out, that information can instrument the whole of the supply chain, and that information can flow back to the producers. So I think there's a lot of really interesting implications in terms of the way supply chains are instrumented and the information is shared. There's things that we need to work out. How do you opt out of this? How do you opt in out of it in a way that's simple and everyone can do? So there's work to be done, but I think profit, people, and planet can all be aligned in this new era where we open the portal between the power of AI and ChatGPT and the physical things that we use on a day-to-day basis.
Almost out of time, Steve. Been fascinating discussion. One more question, if I may, which from what you said, I mean, the technology could run ahead here, run ahead of even the regulatory imperative, which is where we started with Food Safety Modernization Act. I just wonder if you do think that the technology will run in front and open up possibilities where actually the supply chains are reinventing themselves in front of a regulatory approach. So that's one question. Maybe the subset of that question also, from an EU perspective, is do you think that there would need to be a common approach globally, or at least between the EU and the US, about how we begin to deploy this technology from a regulatory perspective?
I think there's already a lot of regulation that will drive this. In some cases, then adoption is ahead of regulation. In other areas, regulation is driving it. I think the food freshness and safety is where regulation is the catalyst. But we already have customers that range from postal services to large online retailers that see the benefit of tracking and knowing where their assets are in ways that just haven't been practical in the past. So I think it'll be a patchwork. There'll be certain segments where the requirement to prove provenance and the requirement for food safety, that's always been something that people wanted to do, but were concerned about overreaching and overextending themselves. So I do think that regulation will be the driver around food safety, based on my personal experience of seeing people wanting to comply but just not being able to align all of the stakeholders in their organization. So I think reasonable regulations are a good thing, and there's going to need to be new standards around this for sure. But I think we've got the basic building blocks of what we need to start now.
Well, Steve, there's been absolutely fascinating and incredibly rich discussion. I'm very grateful for you joining us on the Food Systems podcast and talking about this subject. As I say, it resonates, I'm sure, here in Europe with our listeners, particularly in terms of our concentration on the subject. So thanks very much indeed for taking time and being with us today.
Mark, it's been a real pleasure. Great questions, and thanks for doing your bit to educate people and share the information. That's a big part of this change.
Well, thanks again, Steve. Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.